Hello and welcome to everyone from San Diego to PEI and parts in between and overseas in England. Very good to see you all here today. Thank you so much on behalf of myself and Steve for making the time to come here today. This is not a hat thing, but Steve and I just decided we would wear straw hats or some kind of hat today. Also, we cannot go any further without saying thanks to Beth Jansen for her technical skill for putting together the invitation. Yes, applause for Marisha, that's quite right. And a thumbs up, thank you, Aura, and all that, yes. And also for moderating what's going to come. We're going to have readings, and if you wish to have any questions or comments, or better yet, if you have answers, you can put them in the chat section, and Steve and I, or Steve or I, will handle what we have. So without much further ado, let's introduce Steve, who will be reading first. Steve was born and raised in Montreal. He's lived on PEI since 2001. His books include the novel Our Lady of Steerage and the poetry collection Swinging Between Water and Stone. And you can tell he's a poet just by that title alone. His latest novel is Starfish of David. And so, Steve, or Stevie, as we sometimes say to each other.
Sometimes.
Please read.
Okay. Everyone can hear me, is that right? Oh, good. Okay. Wow. I'm in a totally alien world now. So Starfish of David is a story about a reclusive painter named Samson Grief, who's visited by figments of his imagination who tell him he must build the first synagogue on Prince Edward Island. So I'm just going to launch into it right now. I knew something wasn't right when I looked out the window that bright summer morning and saw the three of them. They were standing in the open field behind my building. I recognized them by their hats, the blue baseball cap, the coral bucket hat, and the yellow pork pie hat. Really? I thought to myself, this again? I decided to go about my usual preparations for the day. My favorite CD, The Future, was playing in the paint-spattered boombox. I made a cup of lapsang souchong and ate a toasted fried egg sandwich. When I looked out the window again, they were gone. I surveyed the rickety table displaying a clutter of brushes, palettes, cans of turpentine, tubes of paint, as well as a variety of scissors, rulers, drawing utensils, etc. Through the boombox speakers, the gentle croak of a certain Jewish lo-fi blues poet made the deceptively simple observation that everything has a crack which functions as an aperture, allowing light to enter. I was grateful to hear this, since it was my habit to play this CD every morning, and considered the observation to be a daily affirmation, inviting me to cross the threshold into a hallowed zone of creativity. As usual, I made the same backhanded remark, a superstitious part of the preparatory routine. Except for the tuchas crack, Lenny, because that's where the sun don't shine. I removed the drop cloth covering the canvas on my easel and experienced an odd shiver somewhere between the hairline at the back of my neck and the slight depression between my shoulder blades. No doubt this was because I couldn't stop thinking about the three figures I had just seen outside my window. There really was no earthly reason why that business should be starting up again after almost 13 years. Had it really been that long? I realized it was exactly 13 years to the month and wondered if it had anything to do with the number 13. I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole, so I forced myself to stare at the unfinished painting before me. It depicted a specific area at North Cape. Normally, a narrow strand of ruddy, stone-encrusted shoreline tapers toward a divide where the waters of the Northumberland Strait meet those of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In my painting, rather than merging, the two bodies of water part, waves rising in rapid brushstrokes of shimmering, aquamarine, tinged with yellowish white streaks, climaxing into a silvery biblical scroll of oceanic sputum to reveal a stretch of iron-rich red soil strewn with seashells, beer bottles, crustaceans, and other detritus from the watery depths. The original concept of the painting was yet another fantasia of Jewish iconography set on modern-day Prince Edward Island. The problem was I still couldn't make up my mind. Should I depict Moses leading his people onto the shores of North Cape, or should they be escaping it? And if the latter, who were they fleeing from? Lobster fishermen, potato farmers, Japanese tourists? The longer I surveyed this half-baked creation, the more I came to realize that my indecision was rooted in a personal conundrum I could no longer ignore, no matter how many layers of Winsor and Newton I slathered onto the canvas. I looked out the window again. Thankfully, the three figures had not reappeared. The first time I became aware of them was in 2002, when I was still living in Charlottetown. I had created a painting called Anne of Bergen-Belsen. It was a portrait of an emaciated Anne Shirley, complete with straw hat and ginger pigtails, their twisted plaits rendered in excruciating detail. But now she was dressed in rags and sporting a yellow David armband. Her left forearm, skeletal and pale, was imprinted with blue tattooed numbers. It was the eyes that filled me with pride. Simmering orange-green embers for irises with dilated coal-black pupils at their centers, like twin abysses of unspeakable terror. They seemed to burn into the viewer's soul, evoking mixed reactions of pity and revulsion. Behind her was a dull gray barbed wire fence, the iron mesh made all the more menacing by being outlined with a sickly bluish white. In the distance was a candy-striped lighthouse, complete with a machine gun-toting German soldier standing guard at the top and a red flag flying a black swastika in a white circle. By the time I laid the last stroke of paint, I knew I had turned a corner in my creative life. I decided to treat myself to a bubble tea in the Cradletown Court Mall. It wasn't my usual choice of refreshment, but I was in the mood to celebrate with something different. I purchased a kiwi-flavored tea at the Red Pearl stand on the mall's uppermost level and sat in the food court seating area. As I slowly sipped through the wide plastic straw, I thought about my creation. Something in the painting scared and excited me. I had never done anything like it, and revisiting the image in my mind's eye made the hairs on the back of my neck tremble. Since moving from Toronto to PEI in 1997, the year the Confederation Bridge opened, my output was more whimsical, according to a profile in The Drone, our monthly arts newspaper. Typical subject matter were watercolors of a swaddled infant Moses in a dory floating past channel markers and buoys on Malpeque Bay, or Joseph wearing his rain slicker of many colors. I also tried my hand at sculpture with a model of Noah's Ark made entirely out of lobster traps. That won first prize in an island-wide competition held at the Cradletown Art Gallery, hosted by Carrie Jo Campbell-John, Minister of Tourism and Culture. There was a cash prize of $500 and a photograph of my ark was used on a tourism poster. The competition's judge was Digger Doherty, host of the long-running TV gardening show A Patch of Red, and still PEI's biggest local celebrity. He called my sculpture clever and suggested a garden gnome playing Noah might give it a cute final touch. My growing reputation led to an article in Charlottetown Parrot with the headline, "The Monet from Away." A freelancer for the Toronto Satellite looking to do a human interest piece on Toronto expats dubbed me Cézanne of Green Gables. Hungry as I was for the recognition, I felt that my work was being misrepresented as mere kitsch and wondered if it wasn't my own fault. In 2001, after the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, it was clear to me that something had to change, and Anne of Bergen-Belsen was definitely a bold departure from my creative status quo. As I was enjoying my kiwi bubble tea and going through all of this in my mind, I had become aware of three men sitting at a nearby table by the food court railing that overlooked the level below. My first clue that they were not locals was their clothing, which bore the distinct signs of tourist attire: colorful short-sleeve shirts and casual headgear, a baseball cap, a straw pork pie hat, and a denim bucket hat. Everything looked oddly random, maybe even too random, as if the outfits were being chosen from a theatrical wardrobe department or a Goodwill shop. It wasn't the clothes so much as the sense of awkwardness or unease the wearers exuded, like they were used to an entirely different garb. I wondered if they might be workaholics, more at home in business suits or some other uniform, who had been forced to go on holiday or were recently laid off. That notion was dispelled when I noticed they all had scraggly facial hair. Could they be outcasts from some religious sect? Trying not to stare, it dawned on me that their hats were doing a bad job of concealing their long hair. When I realized their hair were various shades of red, I truly became uneasy. The one in the yellow pork pie hat, whose gaunt and tanned leathery face tapered to a spade-like goatee the color of burnt cinnamon, making him look like an ancient hipster, glanced my way. I don't know why, but I became so discombobulated, my body did a quarter turn away from him in my seat. I feigned interest in something or other, and for what I hoped was a full minute, counting 60 Mississippis in my head, before turning around again. The table where they sat was now empty. I quickly scanned the food court, but they were nowhere to be seen. I stood and extended my search around the upper level, then climbed down the stairs to the level below, but could not find them at all. There was no trace of their garishly distinctive attire among the wandering shoppers. I was brought back to the task at hand, trying to finish this painting of the parting waters at North Cape by the voice of the Jewish lo-fi blues poet singing through the boombox speakers of Signs for All to See. I held my brush in midair and stared at the painting on the easel, scanning the ocean floor that tapered into the illusory perspective of distance. A different idea slowly began to dawn on me. That observation of his in the song's refrain about everything having a crack to let in the light took on a new meaning. It wasn't that each single thing had its own individual crack. There, in fact, was only one crack, and it ran throughout the world. It was the singular crack that simultaneously divides us from and connects us to each other. And this reddish strand that stretched out to the canvas's point zero of infinity, this strip I had been pondering for the last 5 minutes, was exactly that, the crack that ran through everything. I was wrapping my mind around that faintly glistening kernel of a notion when I saw it. I had to crouch down and bring my face right up to the painting. I couldn't quite make it out, so I found a magnifying glass among the chaos on my work table and inspected that section of the canvas more closely. There, among the detritus I had so painstakingly rendered, was a starfish. But not just any starfish. This one had 6 arms, like a Jewish star. A starfish of David, if you will. It looked to have been painted by a sure and steady hand, with slow, confident delineation, most likely using a fine detail brush. The only thing I knew for sure was that hand did not belong to me. A thick, noxious fog of fear, anger, and general bewilderment erupted in my brain. "Nobody tampers with my work," I cried, while fumbling with a tube of paint, squeezing it directly on the canvas, grabbing the closest brush and mashing the fanned bristles into the oily blob until the image of the six-armed creature was obliterated from my sight. And now, to introduce our co-launcher, Jeff Bursey is an exploratory novelist and short story writer. His latest novel is Unidentified Man at Left of Photo, set in a PEI and Charlottetown of his own making. Jeff.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to read different bits from Unidentified Man at Left of Photo. This is from a chapter called You're Nice People You Are, and it talks about a businessman named Angus McMahon and his store. Another great seller in the first turn of the screw was camouflage gear that, wait, I am mindful that following the shameless portrayal of a luscious redhead as a sex object, and then the undermining of Seatown's amour de soi and its cultivated image as a law-abiding, orderly, civic-minded place where there's no actual desire to burn images of anyone, followed by the faintest trace of sexual looseness attributed to foreign students, talking about war clothing might be classified as a further descent into degradation of a place, a people, a culture, barely above talking in any non-affirming way about the mentally challenged. That some of the mentally challenged enjoy chatting at the Tim Hortons on Kent is no shame on that fine national establishment that has fed many and provided much to charity. Bully for Tim. It's a mark of approval that in the Kent Street location, shatterbrains have found a haven. At times, it's better than any show playing at the Mackenzie Theatre. What sympathy, what niceness the owners and staff of this Tim Hortons show to these unfortunates. And who could possibly object to that or make sport? Remember, niceness is all here. To get back to the camouflage clothing, it wasn't the usual dappled green, gray, black, ochre, olive, which stood out against the cement of the Confederation Center as skateboarders flew off the steps or raced down the metal piping. Angus had his team sounds good, had his international team come up with brand new designs that would not have appealed to the rod and gun club who were pissed off they couldn't discharge their guns within city limits at coyotes, foxes, raccoons, skunks, and the houses of stupid neighbors. Not that they were advocates of violence. They merely wanted their traditional rights respected. And firing a shotgun was no less part of the culture than going to a bootlegger's had been until the mid-aughts, when that malevolent they who controlled much and sought to control more squeezed honest and well-known unlicensed sellers of alcoholic beverages out of neighborhoods because people objected to shady sorts loitering around or spraying vomit over their driveways, passing out on their lawns, drawing murals in a debauched contemporary version of Diego Rivera on sidewalks and the signs of garages, and not paying taxes. Gun clubs agreed that the whole world stank. These men bought effigies. They bought a lot of them. Don't ask if they were for target practice at the Granville Big Boot shooting range. As always, the young people determined the success of urban wear, as Angus called his apparel. City kids who moments before sported pork pie hats, who once wore pants much too long for them, adopted the new clothing at once. Instead of daubs of muddy colors, there were pictorial representations of streets, buildings, doorways, shirts that looked like windows complete with flower pots, curtains, and a person peering out, trousers that looked like telephone poles with mailboxes, garbage bins, cars, fire hydrants, trash bins. Purses with miniature cityscapes, such as the Hillsborough Bridge, with a zipper on the bottom for women to get the thing they needed more quickly, proved to be great sellers. Standing in a crowd, someone wearing these clothes and accessories would melt into the surroundings much better than a regular gorilla. There were hats, scarves, when allowed to float or drape, they would depict people dressed in urban wear, reaching for scarves on which were depicted people dressed in urban wear, reaching for, etc. Bags and knapsacks. They started to be sold a month or so after Joe landed in Seatown. Though attracted to them, he felt too old to wear the Inns of Great George on his chest. In a few months, this stylish line would be featured on national news as people from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and of utmost importance, Quebec, were seen enjoying being bedecked in these costumes. In a different part of the book, the real-life novelist Wayne Johnston is depicted. Here's a news story a character I've called Raymond wrote up for the National Post. Will you check? He braved bee stings and all. A parenthetical note, Canadian Tire money of an unspecified amount, but probably low, waits for the first person to send a handwritten note to the publisher correctly indicating where the title comes from. Tweets and Facebook messages are ineligible. Charlottetown. Wayne Johnston read here 2 nights ago to a packed crowd in the Confederation Center of the Arts Art Gallery. After the reading and a question and answer period, the audience got to sign their eagerly purchased books and talk with Johnston. That's when the sting came. Not with the price of the book, but from another exhibit that was being dismantled at the time. On the lower level, a local avant-garde artist, Chase Gallant Arsenault Buat, had conjured up, in a province full of real farms, a mysterious farmscape visited by discerning people. Part of the exhibit included a functioning beehive. At the moment that Johnston uncapped a pen to sign the first book, held for a photo op by a local radio personality, the hive slipped from a worker's hands. The sleepy bees abruptly woke up. Witnesses interviewed outside later, while being attended to by ambulance crews, recalled mayhem. Some had peered over a low divider after hearing a loud cry from the floor below. They then saw, rising from that level, the dreaded swarm. Screaming and rushing for the nearest exit, one person knocked Johnston over, breaking another of his toes. But by being on the floor and near a wall, as well as under a table, he did manage to avoid the fate of those less fortunate. Perhaps his scattered books also served as a barrier. When the crowd ran for various exits, some escaped, knocking down valued artwork in the surge. But center personnel, organizers of the reading, and those in the front seats were stung many times. As of yesterday morning, there were no reports of anyone dying from anaphylactic shock, though there were people in shock of the regular kind. "We just don't know why the bees were so aggressive," said the owner, who asked not to be named. "They were quiet. They were kept in the dark. Just that one sweaty set of hands changed things." The next morning, bee corpses littered the carpet, and a few were still alive among curtains, behind paintings, and elsewhere in the sprawling building. No attempt was made to capture them. As for Wayne Johnston, he left town as planned for the next stop on his book tour, and he probably is fondly enjoying a world apart from the beehive of disaster avant-garde art sometimes brings with it. Though that had been exciting, and though it embarrassed the beekeeper and his wife who lived somewhere in the country and didn't feel like telling even the closest cousins where they lived or how to reach them, basically saying, "Fuck off." And now look at them, they got in a national paper. As I say, entertaining and better than fiction though that was, it did not touch on the reading people were talking about in the local cafe. That reading was done by Billy Freeperson, originally Dallas Freeman from Tignish, who had returned briefly to PEI to prove that people from there could be successful writers as well as transgender. or at least the latter. Though they had trouble booking a hotel room, much as people from West Prince deny it, they have a reputation, and it's been discussed in the media. Their reading was from The Poet S Genuinely Reflects, went much like this. X did this. Y did that. Then they did this, then did something else, and did it that way, then this way, and felt this, felt that. As for their partner in crime, staunch McKettry's sentences began with, I was, he was, it was. All very laid back, to be polite. But his novel Proof seemed to go down well. Is this where literary fiction is going? A group of writers would not arrive on a consensus about the reading until they had explained that what they heard reminded them of what they had written, or deviated significantly from their own oeuvre. They closed the joint. At another table, musicians tossed around band names, arriving at drive-by shooting, unsure if the first word would be a call to action or a description. Dash or what, guys? Guys? Nobody answered. They'd noticed Siobhan come in, that ball breaker, according to legend, for she looked hot. They got flustered. They knew she'd have no time for them, and one or two regretted not washing their hair that week, but they'd been busy arranging a flash mob to tip over a police car at midnight tonight, place still not determined, because her rad action at Service Canada had inspired every radical they knew. Also, the drugs cruising through their system and the anger felt at everyone under 50 likely staying in the workclothes for fucking ever thanks to stupid panic about the national pension plan running out of funds. Bogus, they cried, and upping the age of retirement by 2 years to 67, meaning there were no bright futures for anyone under 30. You've probably guessed that we're in the spring of rage. On this particular night, the night being particular because a chapter is here, Raymond is also enjoying the event. Apart from dear old John Smith, also present to read our Fiona Papps, her tattoos disappearing beneath her black lace clothing, and Anne Compton. For Raymond's taste, Papps was overly thin, though he could easily see how other men found her attractive. They had never chatted, for how could they? As for Compton, Raymond couldn't help but compare her to Smith. Whereas she came across as an articulator of emotions, Smith embodied them. Something of the actor in him, or the rhapsodist, professorially too shy to inhabit Dostoevsky as John Cooper Poise reputedly had, but perhaps the closest he would come to see such an indwelling by a poet in the fiber of other writers. Compton's words were received passively. Smith's were listened to as if he were an oracle at Delphi. And that is the end of the section from my book. I'm now going to ask Beth to put the covers up and the ordering information for both books, and I will natter on a little while that's happening, and then something else is going to occur. And some people in PEI will recognize the llama from the llama farm, one of many. And people will not recognize the 6-armed starfish, but now they will. Okay, we are now going to do something a little different. We're now going to read from each other's books. Steve.
Okay. What I really enjoyed about Jeff's book was that real people were in it, people who do live in Charlottetown, and I was tickled to find myself in there, even though I don't live in Charlottetown. And that's why I'm going to read this short passage. Joe had been one of the crowd. He walked away shaking his head at the clamor. It reminded him of races during Old Home Week at Red racetrack and casino, with people yelling out guesses as to what the ruby-headed, in his eyes, little girl had died of, as they did with the last one or two, and he had grown tired of the stock market floor approach to this kind of thing. On Great George Street, he navigated around a movie set, Fox Henderson's historical horror epic, Zombie Fathers of Confederation, in an alternate version of 1864, where the circus that came to town at the same time as the Fathers of Confederation featured freaks that burst their cages and, but I don't want to give too much away. At the same time, Jenna McMillan and her crew were camped out in the Great George, filming a sensitive screenplay by Steven Mayoff that could go on to be an award-winning movie in Canada. Such activity. Walking up Prince in the direction of Sobeys, Joe spotted a familiar face, a woman who often walked this street. She may be reading this right now, or be told about it later, so I'll be kind. She had a limp caused by damage to her right foot, which twisted out, but not a club foot. Her brown hair looked clean. Her face wore the same expression it always did, and whenever she spoke to Joe, her tone of voice was invariable. Her eyes were arresting, black, with no whites evident. Maybe like out of Henderson's movie, he thought, though it could have just been excessive makeup, which is what they use in horror movies, so no real difference at all. Today he saw her walking across Prince to a car that a young man his age, and coincidentally in real life, also named Joe, had stepped out of. He athletically bounded to the front door of a home and got inside. His maneuver puzzled the woman, freshly named Ida. She paused mid-step, one bare foot resting on another, then simply returned to the sidewalk our Joe occupied. She approached him. Ida often dressed in brown pants and a flowered blue blouse that didn't reveal anything, no matter how hard he looked while pretending not to. She asked, as she always did, "Do you have a cigarette?" "No, sorry," she walked on. He turned to see if her progress had been checked by his response, but automaton Ida hadn't slowed her pace, and about 30 seconds later, she spotted someone, again on the other side of the street, who she half approached, a man coming out of or going into his house. She stood in the middle of the road and addressed him. There had been no cars for a couple of minutes. She was perfectly safe. Joe wondered how she would react if he did have what she wanted. He also thought that if he was a clever enough fellow, he could have said, "No, I don't have a cigarette, but I've got something else that you can put in your mouth and blow." But that kind of thought never came to him when he needed it. And now Jeff.
Hey, Steve, I don't have a passage about me in your book to read. I'm not going to comment on that. But I will read about Samson, the painter's nemesis, Reuben Arsenault. Reuben Arsenault liked wearing bolo ties and was reputed to own a large collection of them. Aziza told me the amount he owned was exaggerated, but Reuben liked to propagate the story as a way of embellishing his own mythology. In every other aspect, he dressed usual business attire, but according to Aziza, he felt this sartorial quirk set him apart from everyone else. He had picked up a taste for Western accessory, not surprisingly, while studying economics at the University of Calgary in 1985. He proudly claimed that he and Stephen Harper graduated together. Reuben even went so far as to have a number of bolo ties custom made for him with PEI specific symbols, such as a gold lobster with matching gold claws for the string aglets, a brushed pewter potato, a silver buoy, and even a rust-colored ceramic tie in the shape of the island itself. He wore them proudly, business meetings and public functions alike. His business dealings, controversial opinions, the stance against Anne of Bergen-Belsen being only one, and well-known political ambitions kept him in the public eye. He was often the subject, and sometimes the author, of articles and editorials in the Charlottetown Parrot, as well as being depicted in a number of caricatures by that newspaper's political cartoonist, Guy Michaud. Not surprisingly, these cartoons used his penchant for bolo ties as their main satirical thrust. At the height of Rubens' campaign to ban Anne of Bergen-Belsen, the editorial cartoon portrayed him hanging the painting from a noose made from a bolo tie. Other cartoons reimagined his bolo tie squeezing his neck so that his head was an oversized balloon. For the time, he used a hot air balloon in violation of air traffic laws to promote one of his restaurants. Tightened around his mouth as a muzzle after he made a comment about freeloaders from away settling on PEI and taking EI benefits from islanders, even though there was no evidence for such a claim. And wrapped around his head like a hippie headband, having once confessed in an interview to smoking a joint when he was a teenager. Aziza told me she had overheard many one-sided phone conversations where Reuben complained long and loud about these cartoons to the Charlottetown Parrot's editor-in-chief, Grant Goody, who was a drinking buddy. Apparently, Grant always managed to assuage Reuben's affronted ego with a few rounds of single malt and a friendly reminder about the freedom of the press. As a show of goodwill, Grant made sure to commission a puff piece every now and then, pointing out how Reuben's business ventures stimulated local economy and kept the tourism wheels turning. Now that the second annual Lobsterfest PEI was upon us, Reuben's face was a familiar sight on posters, newspaper inserts, and TV ads. He even had a special bolo tie made in the shape of the Lobsterfest PEI logo, a heart with two lobster claws and a lobster tail made of copper with a pinkish red coral inlay. Lobsterfest PEI was a celebration of lobster that ran all of September as a way to extend the tourist season. It was a competition created and employed by Reuben himself with the full support of Tourism and Culture Minister Kiri Jo Campbell-John. Something they probably concocted after sweating up the sheet, Aziza confided to me with ill-disguised revulsion. During Lobsterfest PEI, restaurants, dairy bars, and pubs across the island created culinary variations on traditional lobster rolls and lobster burgers, as well as branching out into ethnic creations such as tacos, gyros, calzones, egg rolls, bagels, or as pronounced by some islanders, bagels, and so on, all with lobster as the main ingredient. Despite the $750 entry fee, many restaurants, especially the seasonal places, participated as a way to drum up business and promote themselves. Many islanders and tourists prided themselves on trying every creation the participating restaurants had to offer. They then could vote online for their favorite, and the winning restaurant would have bragging rights until next year's competition. And that's from Steve's Starfish of David. Great passage.
Yes.
Now, I wonder if we need to show the ordering information again. Beth, if you wouldn't mind, for those who have arrived later than when they were shown first. And thanks again to Beth for her wonderful technical skills here. So there you see how to get the book, how to get the books. And now we will open ourselves up. No, we will open the floor up to questions from anybody. So if you wish to raise your hand and ask a question, just put it in the chat section. And I think we have some questions that came from Beth and from fortune cookies that we found. So maybe we can begin with one of those while the audience, if you wish to ask a question, thinks of a question.
Well, I do have some questions, Jeff and Steve. Some of them came from anonymous sources, and some of them came from Dr. Malcolm Murray, who was not able to be here today, but sent some questions.
He's probably out on a house call.
Yeah, so I have 15 questions. I'm going to cross them off. You can choose a number you won't know what the question is. Who wants to start, Steve or Jeff?
Oh, I'll say question number 3.
Question number 3. What do we got here? All right, from an anonymous source. The weather in PEI is a major influence on life. How does it shape your novel?
Is this up for grab, or do you want to
No,
take
this
that,
is
Jeff?
yours, Steve.
Oh, this is mine, eh? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. How does it shape? Well, it's certainly a point of conversation at times. It shapes it quite dramatically close to the end of the novel. I don't want to give too much away, but it shapes it in a way that changes PEI totally. It changes the entire nature and identity of Prince Edward Island. Again, not wanting to give us any spoilers, to say it does affect it quite a bit.
Thank you, Steve. We are
Okay.
all intrigued.
Good.
All right, Jeff. Any number except for 3.
7. I'll take question number 7.
For 500? No. Okay, number 7. Yes. This is a question from Malcolm. Why did you start writing, and why do you continue?
Why I started writing is because I realized how bad a stage actor I was. And I thought I shouldn't continue with that career. Not that it was a career, but I shouldn't continue with that vocation. And maybe it would be safer and better for everybody if I wrote the words rather than tried to say them and move around with my hands feeling like 2 pieces of meat in a locker and not knowing what to do with them. Why do I continue? Because I have no other good way to occupy my time. And it seems like a fun thing to do.
It's interesting, Jeff, because I also found out that I was a terrible actor and decided to write as well. In fact, I got kicked out of the National Theatre School and said, better figure out something else to do. And it turned out to be writing. Thankfully, there was no national writing school, or else I don't know what I'd be doing with myself.
Steve, what question would you like next?
Oh, I'm going to go with question 1. I want to know the top question.
Question number 1. Nature scenes, for or against?
Oh, totally for, because I live in nature. So I tend to want to write about things that I'm sort of seeing every day and have some general acquaintance with. So nature scenes are in. Always have a nature scene, but try to inject something unnatural in it. I think if that's a good rule of thumb. Always having something unnatural in nature, because
So
that's the way the world
unnatural
works.
nature. Okay.
Yeah, and a natural nature scene.
I think Paul has a wonderful natural nature scene behind him.
Yes, it's not one of our pictures, but it is somewhere we've been, which is in Iceland. So yeah. Thank you.
What's the next one?
Well, it is up to you, Jeff, to choose the numbers in case
I can't actually see them. They're blurry.
Oh, well.
You have to put them where your face is.
I guess I'll just tell you if you're wrong.
Okay. 8.
8. All right. 8. All right. From Malcolm.
And by the way, we should say we don't know what these questions are necessarily. So
That's why I'm having so much fun.
It's all extemporaneous.
From Malcolm. Does the number of times "the" appears in a draft bother you?
I can be definite about that and say no. That's a writer joke. But the word "that" bothers me. I try and delete that as much as I could. And from there, it's really just a short step to getting rid of characters entirely.
It's a slippery slope.
Oh, no. No, it's
Just adjectives.
All right, Steve has adjectives. There we go. So no, "the" is okay with me, but "that."
However, you do have an Olympian novel in which one chapter you couldn't use the word the, correct?
No, I choose letters not to use.
But isn't one of them E? Am I wrong about that? I guess I am.
Yes, but
Are you thinking of George Perrec's novel, A Void or La Disparition?
Yes, I probably am, but Jeff has one in progress. But
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, but I guess E is not one of the, each chapter is a different letter he can't use, but I guess E is not one of them, so.
no,
Correct?
in one chapter, L was the letter I couldn't use.
Yeah.
Which means nothing is conditional.
Hmm.
Steve's turn.
Yes, Steve.
Sorry, there's 15 questions, did you say?
Yep, 15 questions.
Okay, 15.
Steve.
Yeah.
Why so dark?
Oh, as Leonard Cohen said, you want it darker. Yeah, why so dark? It's a good question. And I wish I could come up with a clever answer of some kind, but it's so dark because the light is too bright for my eyes. That's all I can think of at the moment. It's got to be dark. Dark is where the fun stuff is.
Jeff's got his thumbs up for that.
I'm often listening to our answers, finding how similar Jeff's and my answers are. We've sort of gone through a similar journey as writers, realizing we're not good actors, realizing we're not fit for much except for doing this. And maybe that's why it should be dark. That's just because it's where my soul is at home.
Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Jeff.
And again, if anyone has questions who's actually in the audience and wishes to ask, just put it in the chat function. Jeff, I'm sure you have a question. I just know you. Okay, let's go on to the next number. What are the numbers remaining?
2, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
4.
4. Another grammatic question, and there is one in the chat, which we can go to next. That's great. From Malcolm. Malcolm asks, are you happy ending a sentence with a preposition?
I'm neither happy nor unhappy about ending a sentence with a preposition. I think just managing to end a sentence is a cause for rejoicing. And, if writers actually played the game of shots more than apparently they already do, they would just have a shot after every sentence finished. So just getting a sentence down, whatever it might look like, I think that's a wonderful achievement. And if it ends in of, well, so be it.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat from Merrick Waldorf, and he asks, how long have you known each other and influenced each other's writing? Question for both of you.
For both of us. How long have we've known each other? For a long time, well, actually.
This wasn't in the introduction because you didn't write it, but Steve is the winner of an award, the PEI Book Award. I forget the year. And that's after that we met. So whatever the year that was, you won for Fat Calf Blues.
2010.
There we go.
Yeah, that was 2010. Oh, so we've known each other 10 years. Wow. I had no idea it was that long.
It just seems longer, Steve, sometimes.
It does, often. How have we influenced each other? I don't think we have at all. I think we just find similarities that kind of shock us every now and then.
Yeah, I would agree with because we're both outsiders to the island. I think there might be something that's not an influence of one on the other, simply an influence of our position, and that we both had partners there. We were in some way integrated into the community in our own different ways. There were other writers that we met. Steve mentioned about not living in Charlottetown in the passage that he read. So he lives in the country, pleasant, idyllic setting that he lives in Thelma. And we would meet sometimes, Beth and I and Steve and Thelma, in this or that community for long conversations and good food, and sometimes in Charlottetown. I think because we talk a bit about what we're doing, we know some of what the other's thinking is about, but that's more an encouraging than an influence. So that's the answer to that, Merrick.
Great. I think Steve is next for the numbers game.
From the numbers game. Oh, okay. Number 8.
8's gone. Try again.
Oh, 7.
7's gone. You got 2, 5, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Let's go 5.
5. 5. All right. In whose hands would you most like to see a copy of your book, and why?
Wow. Pretty much anyone. I'm not choosy at this point. Most you know, I don't, this isn't meant to be a maudlin or kind of, you know, that kind of answer, but my dad is not alive anymore. I would like to see a copy of my book in his hands. And I once had the opportunity to see one of my books. He actually read a book of mine in front of me. This was a book of poems that I self-published many, many years ago. And I brought it home and showed it to him. And he immediately sat down, and it was a very thin volume, and read the whole thing. And that was probably one of the most uncomfortable times of my life, watching my father read my work and look at the sort of puzzled look on his face, and sort of went, oh, okay, yeah, I think I understand this. I said, oh, Dad, I don't even understand it. You know, what do you, could you explain it to me? Because I haven't a clue. But yeah, I would. I wish my dad was here. I wish he could see the books I've written.
Yeah, I can understand that, Steve. Jeff, next number.
What are the 15?
Oh, 15's gone.
Oh, sorry, 14.
It's like 2, 9, oh, 14. Yep. 14 is hard to find, apparently. Okay, another one from Malcolm. Excluding when characters or a particular narrator talks, which rule of grammar do you intentionally ignore?
Which rule of grammar do I intentionally ignore? That might depend on which book I'm writing. Each book has to be written differently, so that one doesn't go around repeating one's style. So I like to forget how I wrote the last book when I go to the next book. So I will break different rules. I like to do things in one book in particular where I jumble a lot of tenses, which usually is not what you would be told to do in a writing class or writing course, so that you have past, present, future mingled, and the reader actually has to work very hard to figure out what's going on, because usually there's chaos or tumult or a lot of emotions going on at that time. And rather than present them so clearly that they could be placed on the back of a cereal box, this is, after all, literature we're trying to write. I sometimes would ignore the conventions about how things should be presented grammatically and make it a little difficult to figure out what the sense is, so that a reader doesn't view books like TV. They actually have to work at it. And that must get the award for the most pretentious answer to any of these questions so far.
I find that I'm trying to write from a fictional characters. A fictional character will write. And that's the only way I'm able to push myself to kind of try something different, because my characters are writing something, so I want to write the way they might write. Do you do that? Do you ever are you ever writing from a fictional characters, not just their point of view, but as if they were writing it?
Fictional characters, okay. As if is very important in your question just then. Okay, there's no way to be coy about this. And, you know, Steve, we would talk quite frankly about this.
We're frank talkers.
And rather than make this like inside baseball, the idea that characters write themselves is addressed in Unidentified Man, where 2 chapters are left blank. And then the narrator, who is not Jeff Bursey, although some people might think it is, the narrator then says in a later chapter, I left these pages blank just so the characters could come along and write themselves, and nothing happened. So clearly, I don't write as if the characters. I determine what the characters are going to do. I don't know if it was Nabokov said they are my galley slaves, but it's not quite that far. I have a good conception of what they will do and what they will say and how they will say it. So I had a union leader and he spoke in the language of union leaders. They don't get to determine what they say. I determine what they say. And anything else that we might say about characters writing themselves is really a way of saying, we did think this and we made them write this way. We're just not conscious of how it happened.
McLeod was like that. He used to say, I tell them what to do. I tell them where to go. I inadvertently called him a control freak, and he never let me forget that. Okay. Shall I choose? Do I get to choose?
There's a question in the chat, another question in the chat from Merrick, and it's for Jeff. And it says, Jeff, based on your last answer, do you write books simultaneously or usually at totally different times? And I'd like to hear both of you weigh in on that one about, because I actually write I write so many different things simultaneously. But yeah, Jeff and Steve.
Okay, thank you for that question. I can only write one book at a time because each book I determine will be different. So if I was to try to write 2 books at the same time, I think what would happen is I would be using the same style for both books, or there might be a danger in that. And I don't want to do that. So Unidentified Man That Left a Photo was written with a more jazz feel. And I did not have a lot of notes except conversations that I overheard in restaurants or other places that I jotted down the essence of, or lines that people said, speech tics that friends had, events that occurred to me, which I changed quite a lot. I couldn't write a book like that twice, and I would be divided. My energies would be divided and my stylistic intention might be diluted. So I can write literary criticism at the same time as I'm writing a novel, but I can't write 2 pieces of fiction at the same time. It'd be great if I could, one with the left hand, one with the right hand, but that's just not going to happen.
Before Steve answers, Merrick has an additional question, which is, so one doesn't go on hold?
No. The Olympian novel is on hold. It's like in a freezer. And when my mind is able to get back to that, it requires a different kind of thinking. Essentially, you're trying to create the sentences new because the Olympian restraint is that in that book, which does have a title called Ennead, E-N-N-E-A-D. Each chapter has one letter missing. To think in that way while trying to write Unidentified Man, or my newest book, which is out, which is a collection of short stories called An Impalpable Certain Rest, to try and write something other than that at the same time would be too difficult for me anyway. So hold, yes, sometimes hold for a while.
How about you, Steve?
I always have a lot of different projects at various levels of completion or incompletion that I'm working on. In fact, right now I'm working on two books. One is a collection of 3 novellas. I have 2 of them written. I haven't started the other one, the third one, but it's going to be coming along soon. What I'm finishing up now is a novel of linked stories. So I have 3 stories to finish. So I do go back and forth, and every now and then I stop and write something else.
Like even in the same day or the same week, you go back and forth?
It's not, no, it's just a certain time. Though, you know, I'm working on a story now, and though lately I've been looking at songs, so I'm writing song lyrics because I'm working with my songwriting partner on something. So, you know, or every now and then I'll look and see a poem and go, I have an idea for that, and you just go off on it. So they choose. I don't make any choices. I'm a slave.
I don't remember whose turn it is to choose a number.
I'll choose one.
Steve's.
Yeah, go ahead.
You
got 9, 10, 11, 13, 12.
13.
13, lucky 13. All right.
Do we have a question from a dog? Now, a dog question would be really good. Are there more dogs in Steve's book than there are in mine? That's directed to Arisha, whose dog is right in the frame. Yeah, what a good-looking dog that is. Okay, sorry, Beth.
Squirrel. Okay. How important, Steve, how important are allusions to television, radio, newspapers, or other media in your book?
Very, very, very important. Only because they always pop up. I can't seem to stop alluding. The alluding factor is, you know, big in me. I don't watch television. I do, you know, I look at other medium. I look at YouTube mostly. So I am watching television of a sort. So I can't help but allude to it. But at the same time, every time I see about new programs and all these television shows, I don't know any of them. I don't know what Hulu is. I don't know what any of those things are. And so, you know, every time I see a thing on new celebrities, I go, who the hell is that? What show is that? I don't know what that is. Get off my lawn. But yes, lots of illusions all the time. Because that's the world we're in. It's the world I'm in.
Great. Jeff, we got 2, 9, 10, 11.
Well, we have a question from Victoria Best.
Okay.
Which I was trying to send to you, but that didn't work. So I'll the question. For both authors, the pandemic has changed our lives so much in recent times. Do you think it will make an impact on Canadian culture? And if so, what kind of changes might occur? And would the pandemic or situations to do with it be something you yourselves would want to explore in fiction? Now I can read that again because that's a two-part question, which is great. I'm not faulting you. For both authors, the pandemic has changed our lives so much in recent times. Do you think it will make an impact on Canadian culture? And if so, what kind of changes might occur? That's the first part. And that's to both of us. So why don't we deal with that one first? Should I go first, Steve?
Yeah, please.
So Victoria, thank you for that. That's wonderful to read. What is Canadian culture? You see, now I stop at that because someone indicated that, not quite knowing where it is I was born, that I was from the southeast part of Canada. I will correct that. It's nobody who I'm seeing right now. I'm from what in the tourism trade in the 90s was called the Far East of the Western world, which is St. John's, Newfoundland. The culture in the Atlantic provinces is different from the culture that I'm sure Steve grew up in. And I will leave Steve to answer that part. And then there's other parts of the country, like the West, where I now live, and the Pacific, which is one province over, and maybe a place that I'll see Jeff and Aura in next year. And then there's the North, with its many different First Nations cultures. Is there a Canadian culture? I don't know that there is. So leaving that little part out, the pandemic has changed our lives. Will it make an impact? And what kind of changes might occur? It has already made an impact. People are writing, I think, from a more isolated point of view, and perhaps having, at least I feel, I have more sympathy for people who are hard of hearing than I did before, because everybody is hard of hearing with the masks over our faces. We might be thinking more what it means to be on one own and how we miss a community, whereas before we might not have thought too much about getting out of our homes, walking to someplace, having a coffee, a tea, buying bread, and then doing whatever. We might not have thought that that was an unusual thing to do, and now we will. So I think that will make an impact, but as with most things, it will probably take some time to show up. Steve.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I think it's already making an impact. In fact, what we're doing now, this is part of it. Just not the fact, that we're all in different areas, but the fact that we're so distanced, distance has now become a part of our lives. And again, also, just said, Jeff, that people expect, these things to be an immediate thing on the culture. And I tend to think that, to write about the pandemic while we're in it is, you don't, it's this close to you. You need a lot of time to pass to really get a perspective on it. And yeah, I think it's going to stay with us. First of all, because I think pandemics are going to stay with us. I think the variants keep changing. We keep having newer, different diseases coming up. And so I don't think it's going away. So, and I think it's going to be telling us a lot about how we live, and going to be telling us about how to be a part of the world, and not just be in the world, how to be of the world. So yeah, I think it'll be an influence on culture in general for many years to come.
More pandemic, Steve. Why so dark?
It's this damn mask.
The second part of Victoria's question, and that was a really good answer, Steve. And would the pandemic or situations to do with it be something you yourselves would want to explore in fiction? I think Steve has largely answered what I would say too, that we are too close to it. Situations to do with it, well, that could be anything, I suppose. Maybe in time. There are other interests that are more, to the fore, and I think we are not out of a pandemic yet, so it is too close to us to be the newspapermen and journalists of renown who talk about these things on a daily basis.
I would like to perhaps end with the final question, which I will just call moderator's choice.
Yay.
Which is for both of you. Does Malcolm Murray appear in your novel in any form? If not, why not? If a second edition appears, could this oversight be amended?
He does appear. He does appear in my novel.
He appears, and I'm working on a sequel to mine that's going to be called Malcolm Murray. That just came to me. I'm doing that.
Malcolm is not here watching this, but
no, but he will be, and he's going to be tickled pink when he hears that answer.
Which is a sight I'd like to see.
Oh, maybe he can record that and send it to us as a response to this. That would be good.
Well, we've had some great questions and some surprising ones, and thank you, audience members, for participating.
Thank you.
Steve, do you want to say goodbye before I say goodbye?
Wait.
Wait. Oh, wait.
Sorry.
Whoa, there is a final question. That's
there
in.
is. Well, this just in.
Yeah,
This
this just in. Sorry to interrupt. But
I have to
Kimball,
interrupt you. I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry, Beth. Hello, Amy. Now, this is can I tell the story about your interview? Just nod or, okay. Amy as you can probably see, if she turns her head to the side, has red hair. And she, in preparing for an interview as a transcriber in Hansard, where I used to work, had read a portion of Unidentified Man that appeared in a journal called Canadian Notes and Queer, Canadian Stories, and it was online, and it was about red-haired girls dying. But she didn't tell me this when she appeared for the interview. It was only after she got the job, and I'd been there some months, that she asked me, "Do you really hate redheaded girls? And am I in danger of being killed?" Was really the subtext to her question. So thank you, Amy, joining us from Gatineau. And she's still alive, so everybody has the answer to that question. Sorry, Beth, back to you.
No, it's great to see everybody. And there was a question which didn't get asked, which perhaps maybe I should just slide underneath the end there, which is describe your tempestuous feelings about Anne of Green Gables.
You want to go first, Steve? And then we'll get to Jeff's question.
Well, you know, well, she appears twice in my novel. She appears once as a painting of a Holocaust survivor, and she also appears not much later as a political commentator online. So I don't, you know, I love Anne, but you know, she's up for grabs. So she's fair game. That's just all there is. If they're going to venerate her here, she's fair game with the dark guys like us.
She doesn't actually appear in Unidentified Man that left a photo. It's only a red-haired girl. So there is no Anne of Green Gables.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that the LMM Trust understands that. And for people who don't know Anne of Green Gables, that's the Lucy Maud Montgomery Trust. She was the author of Anne of Green Gables. Margie kind of appears in my book, and she will remember a little if she's read the book, or will now rush out and get it. That there's a
from the
joke
library.
From the library, yeah, sure. That we shared a little joke that we made up, and that joke appears in the book. So now Margie's going to be all curious, like, what has been said about me? Maybe she's gone off.
She's gone off to read it right now. So Jeff Kimball has a question in the chat, and right under the wire. Thank you. What is the writers' community in Charlottetown like? Margie's got the book.
Oh,
Margie, you're muted. I can. Oh dear.
I said I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read it, Jeff.
Thank you, Margie. I can't wait till you read it either, because I'd like to hear what you think. Maybe it'll be your next hit theatrical show. And Margie, and I'm not saying that ironically, Margie actually was plastered to Steve and Beth, and Marisha.
Not plastered in the way you mean, yeah.
Yes, I like to leave it in an ambiguous way. So maybe that's one of the grammatical rules that I like to break. A dangling modifier. Her face was plastered all over the Charlottetown Center because of a show that she did, which was quite successful a few years ago. Okay. Back to Beth. Oh, and hello, Jade.
Actually, the question was about
sorry,
the writers. It was Jeff Kim. It was a question about the writers' community in Charlottetown, but maybe I'll expand that to the writers' community in Prince Edward Island.
And sorry,
Steve,
what is it? What is it like?
Careful. What is it like?
Well, see, I'm my own writers' community at this point, which is pretty true because I live in a very, kind of secluded part of Western PEI. It's a very friendly and actually very welcoming, because I don't live in Charlottetown, and there are groups along throughout the island. It's not as united as I would like it to be, but I guess it is what it is. It's small, and it's they really, you know, are very, actually it's gotten much better with people like oh, now everyone's name eludes me, but you know, readings, they do a lot of readings. Well, when, you know, when we're going to get back to that. In fact, there's going to be diverse voices open mic coming up soon, and it's actually fairly strong. It's a very strong community.
I would agree. There are, as in any group, people who you like and people who you get along with really well, and people who you get along with less well. In Charlottetown, there are a lot of events, apart from the months of, I think, January and February. There's usually something, and late December, of course, there's usually something literary going on, which one can attend, and it's either local writers or people who have come in for a series from different parts of the country. And maybe we've never heard of them, maybe we've never read them, but have heard their names, and one can go to those as well. All in all, the local community tries to support its own, and I appreciated that when I was there.
We're very lucky to have the Bookmark, the bookstore in Charlottetown. They're very supportive of local writers, and they'll do everything they can to sell the books at readings and just be part of it. So yeah, we are very lucky.
I could certainly chime in and say that I found the writing community incredibly vibrant and welcoming and stimulating, because there's a lot of, I think when I first joined, it was the Writers Guild. They said it was AM-Pro, so amateurs that all the way to many public, everybody's together, like people who are writing, sort of scribbling verses on the back of a piece of paper, and people who are publishing and internationally. So that made it quite fun, and always, because people are always moving to the island from all over the place, there was always new creativity injected. And I do miss the writing community in Charlottetown a lot now that I'm living in the West. So hi to everybody in PEI and the writing community.
And hi to Arisha too, who has many novels out.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I know you're saying something in objection to that, Arisha, but with your microphone off, it's useless. I have the floor.
I was just saying something like, yeah. My dog wrote them all, really.
That's right.
I just channeled it, but don't let anyone else know, okay?
Wow. I could use an editor. Do you think he'd come over and stay with us? Or?
Sure, but she likes cookies.
Oh, we got tons of those.
Okay, excellent. You're on.
There you go. All
Now
right.
I can only think of that joke that Groucho Marx said, that outside a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside a dog, it's too dark to read.
This is true, but I don't know how I know that. And don't give it away.
So should we conclude now? I don't see any other questions, and you've all been most patient. So Steve, do you want to say your farewells before?
I want to say thank you to Jeff, and I want to say thank you to Beth, and thank everybody who came. It was really wonderful to have this remote audience. I'm still feel like I'm in a sci-fi movie, but I had a great time, and thank you all for coming.
And I'll chime in there with Steve and thank Beth, of course, for her tremendous assistance prior to this Zoom launch and during this Zoom launch. Thank you very much, darling. Thank you all for coming, those who are still here, those who were here and had to leave for various reasons. And we will have a recording of this somewhere, and we'll let you know where it is if should you want to see it. So we're going to close off the event. If you have further questions for Steve or I that come up because of this, that occur to you later, of course, you can contact either of us. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day in the various parts of the world where you live, and all take care of yourselves, and, you know, Keep healthy.